All right, guys. So picking up where the last video left off, it only lets me record 10 minutes at a time. I was talking too much. So this method here that you see, passing electricity through water, this is the method that the little hydrogen fuel cell cars that I have here in class, this is the method that they actually use. And they actually came with a solar panel, a small little solar panel with just a few, maybe even a couple photovoltaic cells that actually power that. So the hydrogen fuel cell cars we have, they are literally all run off of renewable energy. So you put water in them, you connect the solar panel, and the fuel cell, when we get to the diagram, the ones that we have are called reversible fuel cells. So they'll actually split water and then they'll produce electricity when hydrogen and oxygen are recombined to rebuild water, so to speak. And as those electrons travel through the membrane of that fuel cell, that's where you get your electric current. Some of the challenges with hydrogen is that it's chemically locked up. Hydrogen is not a gas that just exists in the atmosphere. It's combined with other things. So really the challenge with hydrogen is freeing it up from those things it's locked up in. Right now, expensive fuel cells are really what we call them. They're the best way to use hydrogen, to utilize it. However, just the technology, it's improving just like any other technology, but it's still expensive at this point. So that's one of the big drawbacks to it. CO2 levels are dependent on the method of hydrogen production. So if you're using fossil fuels to separate hydrogen from whatever it is, whether it's methane or coal or water, then really you're kind of masking the benefits of actually using hydrogen, because you're essentially creating greater carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in just the production of the hydrogen. So it's almost a break even, really. Like I said, you can't just get it out of the atmosphere. Even though hydrogen is the most abundant element on the earth, it doesn't exist on its own. It's combined with other atoms. All right, so you guys have a diagram that I put into your notes of a fuel cell. I left off the labels, so what you guys can do is you can label these things in your notes so that you have them. Like I said, the ones that we have in here, they are called a reversible fuel cell. So these reversible fuel cells will actually do two things. So you can see this is just a one-way fuel cell. So basically you got hydrogen gas that comes in one side of your fuel cell. As it passes through these membranes, the protons come through, the electrons are directed in this way. That's what actually creates the current. Those electrons are eventually going to come back, and your hydrogen at this point is going to combine with oxygen, which is in the air. The only waste produced, the only exhaust produced, if this were in a vehicle, is water vapor coming out. That's the big draw to the fuel cell and potentially being that source of energy in the future. So the biggest things to remember about this is that hydrogen is going to come in, hydrogen molecules you can see here that will be separated. Electrons will pass through the anode. They'll create the electrical current. They're recirculated through these wires within the fuel cell itself. And once they pass through this electrolyte membrane, the hydrogen and the oxygen will recombine. The electrons will be rejoined with the protons of the atoms, and you end up getting water vapor out of this fuel cell. So it's, this makes it pretty simple, and not that you guys have to understand the complete science behind it. But as long as you're roughly familiar with how this works, that's all you need to know. All right, so trade-offs with hydrogen. Advantages can be produced from plentiful water at some sites. No CO2 emissions if produced with the use of renewables. This is one of the bigger challenges. A good substitute for oil. It would help lessen our dependence on gasoline, diesel fuel as the fuel of choice. High efficiency in fuel cells. So you pretty much are stuck using a fuel cell to be efficient enough to where it makes sense. But like I said, the problem with fuel cells is they're expensive. Negative net energy yield. That's one of the big problems right now, is getting to the point where it's going to make sense to use hydrogen as a fuel. We put so much energy into separating the hydrogen from whatever it is to begin with, that the net energy level goes down. CO2 emissions produced from carbon-containing compounds, meaning that if we're using fossil fuels to separate hydrogen from coal, methane, whatever, then we're actually creating CO2 emissions, even though when we use the hydrogen, we're not. So it doesn't really benefit us a whole lot. High costs create need for subsidies. So obviously, this is saying that the government needs to encourage this by subsidizing the technology or the advancement of fuel cells. And then this is one of the big ones as well, is you need a place to store it. You need those tanks. You need the distribution systems, the hydrogen fuel cell stations. All that type of stuff needs to be in place. And typically metropolitan urban areas are where you're going to see that first. All right. So how do we make a transition? This is our last slide for this set of notes. So we can start to make the transition. One of the big things, and we talked about this at the beginning of the chapter, is that energy efficiency is the first focus. So this is going to take time. It's going to take time to move towards renewable energy. And energy efficiency is the one thing we can right now focus on, becoming more efficient in how we do things and wasting less. And that's going to extend the life of our fossil fuels and also give us time to develop a lot of these renewable energies. The second one, and this one, using a mix of renewable energy resources and natural gas. Given the choice of fossil fuels, natural gas is the cleanest. That's the one that we would want to focus on using as we develop renewable energy. Compared to petroleum and coal, much less pollution involved when the combustion of that particular fossil fuel happens, including the environmental and health costs of energy resources and their market price. Basically, that's saying we don't charge enough for coal, oil, and natural gas. We don't take into account the damage that's being done environmentally, and we don't hold the businesses, the companies that produce these fuels, accountable for the environmental damage that they're causing, for the air pollution that they're causing, for some of the sickness that they're causing in metropolitan areas where you're breathing the dirty air that leads to some certain diseases, lung diseases, which we'll get into pretty soon here in the textbook. But anyways, it's a combination of being more efficient, being more conscious about the way we do things, and then on top of that, really working to develop those renewable energy sources. All right, hope this helps you guys with your studying. Thanks.